The case begins with a knock that no one mistakes for a visitor. Too soft to be confident, too slow to be casual. A knock that drags, like someone fighting gravity just to stay alive. And when the door opened, the man standing there, then collapsing, was the last person she expected to see again. Her father. The same man who disowned her at 17 for becoming pregnant. The man who swore he never wanted to see her face again. Yet now, he was dying at her doorstep.
I lived 2 houses away. I heard the knock too. At first, I thought it was the wind or an animal hitting the gate. But then I heard her scream. When I ran outside, he was already on the ground, breathing like every breath was a losing battle. And the look on her face, I'll never forget it. Shock, hurt, confusion. It was like every memory of what he did to her came back at once. But so did something else, fear. Because he didn't come back to talk. He came back to escape something or someone.
By the time I examined the body, the truth was written across his skin. Blunt force trauma to the ribs, recent. A deep laceration near the abdomen. Dirt embedded under his fingernails from dragging himself. He wasn't attacked at her door. He traveled while dying, walked or crawled through several streets, bleeding out slowly. His body was shutting down long before he arrived, but something kept him moving. And the final position he landed in, arms stretched toward her door, that wasn't coincidence. That was intent.
Whatever drove him there, whatever forced him to use his last breath just to reach her doorstep, it wasn't guilt. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a warning. Because the first words he whispered before losing consciousness were not, "I'm sorry." They were something far more chilling. Something that turned a broken family story into a criminal investigation. When he collapsed, the fall wasn't sudden. It was controlled, like a man who had learned the hard way how to fall without dying instantly. He didn't land backward or sideways. He landed forward, toward her. And even in the chaos of those first seconds, she kept repeating the same question. Why did you come here? After all these years, why here? But he couldn't answer. His body was shutting down faster than his mind could keep up. His breaths turned shallow, his vision blurred, and within moments, he slipped out of consciousness completely.
I was the one who grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her back. She was shaking, not because she feared him, but because she didn't understand him. And honestly, none of us did. This was a man who didn't even attend her child's birth, a man who blocked her number, a man who told everyone he no longer had a daughter. So seeing him on her doorstep, bleeding into her doormat, it didn't make sense. It didn't match the man we all knew. But when I looked closely at him, at the terror in his eyes before they shut, I realized something. He wasn't running to her. He was running from something else.
If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight.
The angle of his collapse told its own story. His muscles were exhausted, trembling, barely functioning. His internal injuries were worse than they looked. The bruises on his torso weren't random. They were deliberate, concentrated blows done with force and precision. His abdomen had begun filling with blood, preventing deep breathing. And the trail he left behind, small droplets, uneven spacing, indicated he stopped several times to rest or hide, meaning whoever attacked him didn't intend for him to live long enough to reach this house, yet he did. He made it further than his injuries allowed, which means he had a specific destination in mind and a very specific reason to get there.
And that reason would change the direction of the case entirely, because when he finally regained consciousness, briefly, What he said wasn't an apology. It wasn't regret. It was a name that pulled this investigation away from family drama and straight into something darker. When he finally came back around, it wasn't for long. His eyelids fluttered, his breaths were jagged, and his body fought against the pain climbing through him. But even with his voice breaking apart, he managed to push out one word, one name, a name none of us recognized at the time. And once he said it, his entire body tensed, as if just speaking it brought back the fear that nearly killed him. He didn't explain what the name meant. He couldn't. His strength was draining too fast. But the way his hand tightened around his daughter's arm before he slipped under again, that told us he believed that name was the key to everything.
I was standing close enough to hear it. It wasn't a soft whisper, it was a desperate plea. Like he was trying to force the truth out before his body shut down completely. And the way he said it, like the name was heavier than the blood soaking through his shirt, made me freeze. Because I'd seen that fear before, not from him, but from other people in this neighborhood. People who vanished, people who suddenly moved, people who owed the wrong person too much. And when she heard the name, the daughter didn't recognize it, but she reacted anyway. Her whole face changed, not because she understood, but because she realized her father wasn't just dying. He was trying to protect her too. Again, too late, too broken, and with too little left to give.
Medically, the fact that he spoke at all was remarkable. His lungs were partially collapsed. His blood pressure was dropping rapidly. His internal bleeding had reached a point where consciousness should have been impossible. But trauma can do strange things. When the brain experiences extreme fear or urgency, it releases a final surge of adrenaline, a last attempt to complete unfinished business. That surge likely gave him those few seconds of clarity. And those few seconds were enough. Enough for a name, enough for a direction, enough to reveal that this wasn't a random attack. This was intentional, calculated, and connected to someone powerful enough to terrify a man moments from death.
So we wrote that name down. We circled it. We repeated it. Because whatever happened to him didn't start at her doorstep. It started with that name, and unraveling the truth behind it would pull us into a world of secrets he spent years hiding from the daughter he once abandoned. To understand why he came to her door, to die there, of all places, we had to go back to the moment everything fell apart between them. She was 17, pregnant, scared, and instead of protection, she was met with anger. Instead of guidance, she got rejection. He threw her out with nothing but a backpack and a warning never to return. That single decision shaped everything that followed, her childhood ending overnight, her trust shattered, her future rewritten by someone who was supposed to protect her. She rebuilt her life alone. She found small jobs. She rented cramped rooms. She raised a child without help. And she never once heard from him again. No calls, no letters, not a single apology. So when he collapsed on her doorstep, bleeding and shaking, she didn't see a father. She saw a stranger who had once turned his back on her so completely that she stopped expecting anything from him at all. Not love, not support, and certainly not his return.
I remember those early years after he threw her out. She worked nights at the little roadside shop, slept in the back whenever her shift ran too long. She barely talked to anyone. She was just surviving. And every time someone asked about her parents, she changed the subject. She was hurt, but she was proud. She never begged them to take her back.
By the time she built a stable life, she had learned to live without him. She created her own world, one where he simply didn't exist, a world where she believed the past was buried, irrelevant, gone. But the truth was, he had never stopped watching, never stopped following her life from a distance. He knew where she lived, where she worked. He even knew her child's name. He kept his distance, but he never let go of the guilt. And guilt, when ignored long enough, turns into something darker: fear, regret, and desperation.
Psychologically, people who abandon their children often develop what we call delayed remorse, a guilt that resurfaces violently years later. It manifests as secret attempts to make amends, even if the person can't face the child directly. The father's injuries, his panic, his determination to reach her, all suggest his guilt had transformed into a sense of responsibility, a responsibility he acted on too late.
Her past wasn't just a sad chapter in the story. It was the key to understanding why he dragged his broken body back to her door. Because the man who once pushed her out had been trying quietly and secretly to protect her ever since. And the threat he brought with him, the one tied to that name he whispered, was connected to something he'd been keeping from her for years, something he thought he could fix alone. But he couldn't. And now the danger he feared was moving closer to her than ever.
The moment we began piecing his past together, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't a man who lived an ordinary life after abandoning his daughter. The silence between them wasn't just emotional distance, it was protection. It was strategy. Because the father had gotten himself entangled in something far beyond a family dispute, something bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than anyone around him knew. For years, he worked jobs that didn't match the money he suddenly had. He made sudden moves. He severed friendships. He refused to talk about his new associates. And he carried fear like a second skin, never speaking about it, but always showing it in the way he locked his doors twice, checked windows 3 times, and refused to drive the same routes home. Those closest to him thought he was paranoid, but paranoia doesn't beat a man to death. This was real. And whoever he whispered about with his dying breath belonged to a world where debts were paid in blood. Investigating his records wasn't easy. Most of them were missing, wiped, or altered, but the pieces that remained told us enough. Someone had pulled him into an underworld operation. We still couldn't tell if he agreed willingly or was forced, but we knew this much. Once he was in, he couldn't get out. Not safely, not alive. And that brought us to the part he hid most carefully, the part that explained everything. He'd been paying off someone, not for himself, but for her, the daughter he abandoned publicly, yet protected privately. For years, he sent money, not directly to her, but to people circling her life, people who threatened her job, her safety, her child. Each threat reached him, not her, and each time he paid. He kept her safe by keeping her ignorant. But debts grow, and when the payments stopped, either because he couldn't afford them or because someone decided they wanted more than money, the consequences were immediate. That beating he suffered wasn't random. It was a message, and the message was simple. Your daughter is next. He didn't come to her out of guilt. He came to her because he knew the danger was no longer satisfied with him. It was coming for her, and he had run out of time to stop it. So with his last strength, he dragged himself to the only place he believed the truth needed to land, her doorstep. Not because he'd always been a father, but because he was trying, for the first time in his life, to act like one.
The name he whispered before slipping out of consciousness wasn't just a clue, it was a warning. A single word powerful enough to shift the entire investigation from a simple assault to something far more calculated. That name belonged to a man whose reputation rarely traveled in the open. a man known only in shadows, spoken about in quiet corners, never written on paper. And the moment we heard it, the air changed. We searched our databases, our records, every hidden file we had access to. Nothing. Not a trace. No history, no birth record, no employment. It was as if the name had been intentionally erased. But cases like this teach you something important. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who don't exist on paper. And the father had been dealing with exactly that kind of man. Every question we asked led to the same dead end. Every attempt to track this name brought us only fear, silence, and warnings disguised as advice. People said things like, "Drop it while you can," and "That's not a trail you want to follow." No one would say his real involvement aloud. No one dared. But fear itself is a form of confession, and everyone's fear pointed in the same direction, toward the kind of man who didn't threaten people. He erased them. It became clear that her father wasn't just running from someone violent. He was running from someone powerful, connected, and accustomed to getting what he wanted without witnesses. And whatever debt her father owed, it was personal, deep, and dangerous enough that simply speaking the name felt like a crime. But the question that haunted us was simple. Why her? Why was this man, this ghost in human form, interested in a woman who hadn't seen her father in years? That was when we found the first hidden thread, a connection that didn't make sense at first, but fit perfectly once the truth unfolded. Her father didn't owe money. He owed silence, and whatever secret he had been keeping was tied directly to the life of the daughter he'd abandoned. When he whispered that name, he wasn't telling us who hurt him. He was telling us who was coming for her next. And that meant one thing. This wasn't a closed scene. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of hers. By the time the officers returned with the first round of forensic updates, the hallway outside the interview room had gone silent. Everyone could feel it. Something about this case wasn't just a honeymoon gone wrong. It was personal, calculated, and deeply practiced. Inside the small room, the air was stiff with stale coffee and fear. Detective Ramos placed a thin brown envelope on the table and slid it toward the lead investigator. No words, just a look. A look that said, "This changes everything." When the envelope opened, a new layer of the husband's hidden life spilled out. Because the prints recovered from the shattered lamp, the bruising patterns on the bride's wrists, and the entry angle analysis of the wounds all pointed to one thing. He wasn't reacting. He was reenacting. This wasn't rage. This was routine. The investigators began reviewing his travel records, financial statements, and old police reports. And then they found it. A woman from 6 years earlier. A girlfriend he lived with before he ever met his bride. She too had filed a report about a violent episode after a night out. She too had spoken of his sudden change behind closed doors. She too ended up in the hospital. But she survived. Barely. Her case disappeared after she suddenly withdrew her complaint. She had told the original officer, "He told me he's forgiven me for lying and he won't hurt me again." But investigators now knew she never lied. She was simply the first woman who survived his darkness long enough to apologize for it. With every page reviewed, the honeymoon tragedy began looking less like a moment of shock and more like the final chapter in a pattern that had been boiling beneath the surface for years. Still, one question remained. What exactly did he see on the honeymoon night that pushed him from control to kill. Because hidden in the evidence logs was a detail so disturbing that detectives paused the entire room before reading it aloud. A detail the bride carried with her that the husband had never known until the moment she revealed her face. And when he saw it, his reaction was instant, explosive, and deadly. What did he see, and why did it trigger him so violently that he executed her without hesitation? If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight. From the moment her father whispered that name, the investigation changed shape. It was no longer about a dying man collapsing at his daughter's doorstep, but about the storm quietly circling her life. A storm she didn't even know she was standing in the center of. Because that name didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone who had appeared in her life 3 weeks earlier, wrapped in charm, confidence, and calculated normalcy. A man she described as the first person to ever truly listen to me. A man she thought she met by coincidence at a community clinic waiting room. A man who offered her a ride home the very same evening. Someone she believed was safe, someone she believed was new. But he wasn't. He wasn't new. He wasn't a coincidence, and he certainly wasn't safe. Her father's final whisper hadn't been a warning. It was a confession. He had kept this man away from her for 17 years, and the moment he was no longer strong enough to protect her, the man returned to finish what started long before.
I remember the first time she mentioned him to me. I worked the night shift at the building where she lived. She told me she was finally meeting someone decent. Said he made her feel seen. Said he understood her pain in ways nobody ever tried to. She smiled when she talked about him. But the way she smiled, it wasn't joy. It was relief. Relief from loneliness, the kind dangerous people recognize instantly, the kind they use.
When detectives pulled his background, the pattern was unmistakable. He only appeared in the lives of young women with fractured family histories. Women who felt invisible, forgotten, unloved. Women just like her. And then came the second thread, the one that connected him directly to her father. 17 years ago, the father had reported a man lurking outside their home at night, watching through windows, photographing his daughter as she slept. The report vanished. The man disappeared. The father moved states, changed numbers, started over alone. But predators are patient. They wait. They learn routines. They track lives. And when they return calculated, controlled, prepared. And this time, he didn't come for the father. He came for the girl he had watched grow into a young woman, the girl her father abandoned to protect, the girl who now had no idea she was being hunted again. The father died at her door trying to warn her, but his final breath wasn't enough to stop what was already moving toward her. Because the man with the whispered name was already in her life, already in her apartment building, already in her phone. And worst of all, she was already beginning to trust him. The most chilling part of this case wasn't how the hunter found his way back into her life, but how effortlessly he tightened his grip
without her noticing a single thing. It began small, the way these men always begin. A perfectly timed text, a warm check-in, a moment of comfort on the exact day she felt overwhelmed. Every message felt like care. But to us, looking back through the evidence, it read like surveillance notes. He wasn't comforting her. He was tracking her emotional weak spots, cataloging them, learning where to press. Within days, he made himself familiar with her routines. What time she left for work, what time she watered the plants on the porch, what time she sat alone in her apartment scrolling through her phone. By week 2, he had built his presence around her life so subtly, she mistook manipulation for compatibility. He didn't ask questions. He already knew the answers. She told him her favorite food. He just happened to pick it up. She mentioned losing sleep. He appeared the next morning with tea. She said she didn't feel safe walking home late. He offered to walk with her every night. To her, it felt like support. To us, it read like ownership. Then came the deeper tightening, the psychological closing in predators rely on. He began isolating her without sounding controlling. Your friend doesn't appreciate you. Your landlord is taking advantage of you. Your coworkers don't understand what you survived. Little by little, he framed himself as the only person truly loyal to her. And she believed him. Not because she was naive, but because she had lived 17 years being abandoned by the person who was supposed to love her most. That wound was his doorway. He walked right through it. Then came the most calculated move. He convinced her that the final name her father whispered meant nothing, that it was just the rambling of a dying man, that she should forget it and focus on the future he planned to control. But the irony is this: the closer she moved toward him, the more tangled she became in the very secret her father died to protect. Because the hunter wasn't just tightening his hold. He was circling in for the moment he had waited 17 years to reclaim.
The shift began quietly. Not with a scream, not with a sudden attack, but with a feeling. A tightening in her chest. A moment she couldn't explain. A sense that something was off. Wrong. Invisible, but present. It happened 3 days after her father's funeral. She came home from work, unlocked her apartment door, and immediately felt it. The air inside was still. Too still. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from silence, but from interruption. From someone being where they shouldn't have been. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing was stolen. But something was different. And her instincts wouldn't let it go. That night, she sent the hunter, the man she still believed was her comfort, a message. "I think someone's been in my apartment." His reply came too fast, too rehearsed. "Don't worry, it's just grief playing tricks on you." But grief doesn't move objects. Grief doesn't shift things half an inch to the left. Grief doesn't leave the faintest scent of a man's cologne in a home where no man lives. The next morning, she found the first undeniable sign. Her bathroom cabinet, one she kept tightly organized. Inside, a bottle of her prescription anxiety medication was turned label out, as if someone studied it before putting it back. That was when the questions began circling in her mind like insects around a wound. Had she forgotten something? Had she left the cabinet open? Had she moved the bottle herself?
But deep down, she knew. The second sign came 2 days later. A small, almost invisible device wedged behind her living room curtain. At first, she thought it was a piece of broken plastic, but when she picked it up, a red light blinked. Quick, sharp, undeniable. It wasn't broken plastic. It was a microcamera. Someone had been watching her. Not for minutes, not for hours, but for weeks. And when she confronted the hunter, the man who was supposed to care for her, he reacted with anger. Not concern, not fear, not protectiveness. Anger at her suspicion, at her paranoia, at the idea she would doubt him. He wasn't surprised she found the camera. He was surprised she found it so soon. Because this wasn't random surveillance. This wasn't an intruder. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone who knew exactly where she spent her evenings, how she moved around her apartment, where she sat, where she slept, where she cried. Someone who positioned the camera for the perfect angle. Someone who wanted to see her unguarded, unaware, unprotected. Someone who had been watching her long before she ever thought to be afraid. And the most terrifying part? This wasn't the only camera. It was just the first one she discovered.
Finding the first camera was terrifying, but it wasn't the discovery that broke her. It was the second one. The one hidden where no one should ever have access, where a person should feel untouchable, unobserved, safe. Her bedroom. Inside the only space that still felt like it belonged to her. It happened the next morning. She hadn't slept, she hadn't eaten, she hadn't answered the hunter's messages. Instead, she tore through her apartment looking for anything that explained the fear curling inside her ribs. And it was in that frantic search that she noticed something that didn't belong. A small hole, perfectly round, no bigger than the width of a pen tip. It sat just above the baseboard, behind her nightstand, facing directly toward her bed. Something so subtle she had walked past it 1,000 times without ever stopping to question it. But now she saw it. And when she leaned close, she felt it. The faintest warmth of a working device humming behind the wall. Her hands trembled as she moved the nightstand aside. Dust fell. The light shifted, and then she saw it clearly. A black fiber optic lens threaded through a drilled hole straight into her bedroom. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't a last-minute installation. This was craftsmanship. Precision, planning. Someone had taken their time, measured the angle, calculated the distance from the bed, chosen a spot where her body would always be in view, whether she was sleeping, dressing, or simply trying to breathe. She stepped back, horrified by the realization that someone had watched her in the most vulnerable moments of her life. And not just recently. Not just since her father's death. This hole was old. Painted over twice, repainted after that. Someone had maintained it, protected it, passed it through years of hiding. This wasn't just surveillance. This was obsession. And it forced her to ask the question she had avoided since finding the first camera. How long has he been watching me? How many years? How many apartments? How many places I thought were mine? Then she found the worst evidence of all. Evidence that didn't require forensics, didn't require analysis, didn't require interpretation. Evidence that made her sink to her knees. A small strip of electrical tape peeled away from the wall and accidentally dropped behind her dresser. On it, a single fingerprint. One, detectives later confirmed, belonged to the same man her father used to chase off their property 17 years earlier. The man she had unknowingly let back into her life. The man her father died trying to warn her about. The man she now realized had been inside her bedroom more than once. But the true horror hadn't revealed itself yet. Because when detectives opened the wall and extracted the camera, they found something else. A thin wire running deeper into the structure toward a place no one expected. A place that proved the hunter wasn't just watching her. He was living closer than she could have imagined.
The wire in the wall should have been a simple clue. A basic extension cord feeding a cheap camera. Nothing more, nothing complicated, nothing alarming. But instead, it was the detail that broke the entire case open. Because when the detectives traced that thin black wire, they weren't led outside her apartment or down the hallway or into some distant power source. No, the wire didn't leave her wall at all. It burrowed deeper, deeper into the structure of the building, deeper into the place she assumed was nothing more than dead space. And when the team followed it, cutting through plaster, insulation, and old wood, they realized something chilling. There was a gap, a hollowed-out channel between her unit and the one next door, a space wide enough for someone to crawl through, wide enough for someone to hide, wide enough for someone to live. They kept cutting, inch by inch, until the wall gave way into darkness, a small private tunnel, constructed, not accidental, maintained, not abandoned. Someone had carved out a path inside the walls of her home, a path that led straight from her bedroom to the apartment beside hers. And that was when the truth hit, hard, cold, undeniable. The neighbor who lived next door, the man who hollowed out the walls, who installed cameras, who collected images of her life, wasn't just creepy, wasn't just quiet, wasn't just private. He was connected, literally wired into her life. Detectives broke down the door to his unit and stepped into a room that felt more like a shrine than a home. Shelves lined with photographs, not printed, but screen-captured images taken from hidden cameras, images of her brushing her hair, images of her lying in bed reading, images of her crying the night her father died, images of her sitting on the floor grieving the childhood she lost. Every moment she thought was hers had belonged to him instead. But the worst discovery wasn't the photos. It wasn't the camera system. It wasn't the stacks of notebooks filled with observations, routines, and intimate details about her life. It was the wall itself. Because on the opposite side of her bedroom, hidden behind layers of wallpaper and paint, detectives found another hole, not drilled, carved, a small peephole worn smooth by repeated use, a place where he had pressed his eye against the wall night after night after night, watching her breathe, watching her move, watching her sleep, watching her live a life he believed he had a claim to. And then came the detail that made her collapse when we told her. The man next door, the man who hollowed out the walls, who installed cameras, who collected images of her life, wasn't new to her story. He had lived in that unit for 8 years, 8 entire years. Long before she ever moved in, long before her father collapsed at her door, long before she ever learned his name. 8 years
waiting, watching, preparing. Her father didn't come to warn her about a stranger. He came to warn her about someone who had already made his home inside the structure of her life. Someone he'd been fighting off since she was a child. Someone who never stopped after her father ran. The truth shattered her. The threat wasn't closing in on her. It had been around her the entire time. Inside her walls, listening, breathing, waiting for the day she finally lived alone with no father to stand in the way.
The discovery inside the walls should have been the end. A horrifying end, yes, but an end nonetheless. Evidence collected, suspect identified, victim relocated. But when detectives stepped deeper into that hidden space, behind the neighbor's wall, they found something that told us one brutal truth. The hunter wasn't finished, not even close. Inside a metal lockbox, tucked behind insulation, wrapped in a plastic sheet, and sealed like evidence, lay the final sign of his intentions. A set of keys. Not to his apartment, to hers. 2 copies, both recently cut, both sharp-edged and unused, both waiting for the night he planned to enter her home without crawling through the walls, without cameras, without secrecy. He was done watching. He was ready to act. Detectives also found something worse. A printed map of her apartment, drawn by hand, with markings across her bedroom floor. Arrows, measurements, X's placed in specific points around her bed. To anyone else, it would look like a home renovation sketch. But to seasoned investigators, those markings told a different story. They were distances, trajectory estimates, points of leverage. He had mapped how he planned to approach her, how he planned to restrain her, where he intended to stand so she couldn't escape. Every angle, every contingency, every second of the attack planned out like choreography. But the detail that chilled detectives the most was the date written at the top of the map. Tonight. The very night she discovered the camera. The night she thought things were finally over. The night she believed she could breathe again. He hadn't been planning someday. He had been planning now. And then, as officers swept deeper into his apartment, they made the discovery that forced the entire police unit to erupt into emergency protocol. A live audio feed, still transmitting, still active, still listening. A small receiver, hidden behind his couch, was picking up sound from inside her apartment. Even after his cameras were removed, even after the wall was opened, even after the officers cleared the space, she wasn't safe. Not yet. Because as detectives stared at that blinking light, they realized the horrifying truth. He was still listening to her. Somewhere close, somewhere nearby, maybe even inside the building. And he knew, at that very moment, that his secrets were exposed, that his hiding place was gone, that his window of opportunity was closing. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to hide. He was going to finish it. The moment detectives realized he was listening, the tone of the investigation snapped from discovery to survival. They moved fast. No warnings, no hesitation, no chance for him to anticipate their next step. 2 officers sprinted to her unit, while the rest of the team flooded the stairwells, the hallways, the basement exits, every possible escape route.
But when they reached her door and told her to step back, to stay quiet, to stay behind them, they heard something on the other side of the wall. Something slow, something deliberate, something that made every officer draw their weapons at once. Footsteps. Not in the hallway, not on the stairs, not in the crawl space. Inside the walls, moving toward her bedroom, moving toward her. The space behind the plaster, the hidden tunnel he carved, was echoing with the sound of someone crawling fast, determined, unhinged. He was coming for her. Right then, right there. Detectives tore through the wall, splitting wood and insulation apart in a shower of debris, and caught him inches away from the opening he planned to burst through into her home. His eyes wild, clothes coated in dust, hands reaching forward like he was already touching her. It took 6 officers to pull him out of the crawl space. 6. He fought like a man who believed he was entitled to her life, to her space, to her body, to her future. And when they dragged him into the hallway, restrained and raging, he said one sentence that finally explained what her father meant with his dying breath. He said, "She was promised to me." Promised, not by her, not by choice, but by a debt, a dark debt, her father spent years trying to outrun. 17 years earlier, while she was still a child, her father discovered a man obsessed with her, long before she was old enough to understand the danger. A man who believed he was his to claim, a man who had been watching her since she was barely old enough to speak. Her father tried to fight him, threatened him, beat him to keep him away, but the man never stopped, never forgot, never let go.
The silence her father owed was the secret he carried for years, that someone had marked his daughter long before she even knew the meaning of fear. And the night he stumbled to her doorstep, covered in blood, he wasn't seeking forgiveness. He wasn't seeking reconciliation. He was trying to save her one last time. When police searched the hunter's home, they found one final object, a sealed envelope with her name on it, and a date written on the outside, the date of her 17th birthday. Inside, a photo of her as a child, taken through a window, the angle unmistakably from her old home's yard, and a note, "Soon." That was the truth her father died to deliver. That was the warning he didn't have time to explain. She wasn't being hunted because of something she did. She was being hunted because of something she never knew. And now, with the man arrested, the cameras removed, the walls patched, and the locks changed, she finally learned something her father spent his whole life trying to teach her. Some dangers don't strike suddenly. Some stalk you quietly, patiently, perfectly. But no matter how long a predator waits, 8 years, 17 years, a lifetime, they all make one fatal mistake. They underestimate the moment a survivor finally sees the truth and chooses to fight back. Her story didn't end with fear. It ended with freedom. And the man who lived inside her walls, he'll spend the rest of his life behind walls of his own. If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight.